I want to thank both Senator Rockefeller and Senator Hutchinson for their work on this important and, in my view, all too controversial nomination, and I urge my colleagues to vote in support of the nomination of John Bryson to be the 37th Secretary of the Department of Commerce. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas is
Mr. President, I just want to thank the distinguished senior citizen, senior senator from Arizona, having a bad night. I want to say he was chairman of the Commerce Committee and did a fine job, and I am so appreciative that he put in perspective the role of advise and consent in the Senate, because there are times when all of us have said the issues regarding a certain nomination are so great that they would not allow us to vote for confirmation. But that is not the case here. And I do think that Senator McCain made the eloquent statement that Mr. Bryson might not be his choice, but that's not the question. That is not the question before us. He is qualified for this job. He has the business background that we need. We certainly need a Secretary of Commerce to be able to help our businesses grow and create jobs, and elections have consequences. And I thank the senator from Arizona for taking the time to come and make that part of the record complete, and I'm very pleased that we are having this kind of discourse, and I think that the record will be complete, and I believe that when our colleagues think about the importance of the President having his nominee for this job and the qualifications that Mr. Bryson has, even if you disagree on issues, which I certainly do, which Senator McCain does, Senator Barrasso, but nevertheless, we're going to disagree on issues. That's something that happens every day. But does it rise to the level of voting against this nomination is the question that we have to answer. And I thought Senator McCain answered it very well. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
From Minnesota is
Mr. President,
recognized.
are we in a quorum call?
The Senate is currently in a quorum call.
Will I ask that the quorum call be vitiated?
Without objection.
I'm here today to talk on behalf of Commerce Secretary nominee John Bryson. Mr. Bryson testified before our Commerce Committee. I was impressed by his background and by his ability to answer the questions, by his understanding of business. I think everyone knows we are facing difficult economic times in this country, and we need someone in that job that understands business. Mr. Bryson has strong and broad support within the business community, and his nomination has been endorsed by such groups as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, and the National Association of Manufacturers. 6 former Commerce Secretaries, from George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, Nixon administrations, those Commerce Secretaries from those presidential administrations have also joined in strongly supporting his confirmation. Mr. Bryson, as you know, Mr. President, was reported favorably to the entire Senate by the Commerce Committee. You look at what some of the groups have said about Mr. Bryson. The Business Roundtable. They say John Bryson is a proven, well-respected executive who will bring his private sector experience to the Commerce Department's broad portfolio. The National Association of Manufacturers. They say this: Bryson has a strong business background, which gives him the advantage of having exposure to the difficult issues manufacturers face in today's global marketplace. The National Association President and CEO, Jay Timmons, said that Mr. Bryson has a strong business background and serves on the board of many manufacturing companies, which gives him the advantage of having exposure to the difficult issues manufacturers face in today's global marketplace. I believe a lot of way we get out of this downturn, Mr. President, is manufacturing. It's making things in America again. It's inventing stuff. It's exporting to the world. And these business groups know that Mr. Bryson understands their issues. Chamber of Commerce says Bryson has extensive knowledge of the private sector and years of experience successfully running a major company. We hear from Edison International. Bryson was a visionary leader of Edison International, and we know that he will bring that same leadership to the Department of Commerce. Boeing says this: John Bryson's global business experience and strong leadership skills are a great match for the position of Secretary of Commerce. You serve on the Commerce Committee, Mr. President, as I do. I head up the subcommittee on competitive innovation and export promotion, and I've seen firsthand the need to make sure that the Commerce Committee is thinking every single day, as the Commerce Department should, about how we get more jobs in this country, how we make sure we're working with business as partners, how we make sure we get through the red tape that we should, that we put forward a competitive agenda for this country, and that is why I am supporting Mr. Bryson for Commerce Secretary. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Do you want to notice the absence of quorum? Mr. President, I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I rise in support of John Bryson of California, President Obama's nominee to be Secretary of Commerce. Mr. Bryson will bring a wealth of experience in both the private sector and the public sector to this very important job of Commerce Secretary. And Lord knows we're in a recession. We're fighting hard to get out of it. We need a Commerce Secretary, and we need someone who understands the private sector and the public sector, and you have that in John Bryson. In the 70s and 80s, he served as the chairman of the California Water Resources Board and as the chairman of the California Public Utilities Commission. There he helped California navigate droughts and oil shortages and other crises during a critical period in my state's history. And for more than 20 years, Mr. Bryson has utilized his talents in the private sector, first as chairman and CEO of Southern California Edison, and later as chairman and CEO of Edison International. Mr. Bryson has also served on the boards of many companies, both large and small, and he will bring to the job of Commerce Secretary a unique expertise on what it takes for businesses to grow and expand. Mr. Bryson's top priority is job creation. As Commerce Secretary, he'll be working closely with the President to meet the goal of doubling our nation's exports by 2015 and creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs right here in the United States. He'll be working with the private sector to drive innovation and economic growth. And he'll be working to make the U.S. a leader in the clean energy economy. At Edison International, Mr. Bryson helped California become a hub for clean energy development and clean energy jobs by making investments in those renewable technologies. He understands new clean energy technologies will create millions of jobs here at home, and that the nation that rises to this challenge will lead the world because the whole world is looking for these kinds of technologies. So I think Mr. Bryson comes to us with varied experiences which will serve us well and will serve President Obama well. Mr. Bryson's nomination has been applauded by all sides of the political spectrum, from environmentalists to business interests. Tom Donahue of the Chamber of Commerce praised Mr. Bryson's, and I quote, extensive knowledge of the private sector and years of experience successfully running a major company, unquote. The Business Roundtable called Mr. Bryson, quote, a proven, well-respected executive who will bring his private sector experience to the Commerce Department's broad portfolio that includes technology, trade, intellectual property, and exports, which will be crucial to expanding our economy and creating jobs. The Natural Resources Defense Council, which Mr. Bryson helped found in the 70s, called him, quote, a visionary leader in promoting a clean environment and a strong economy. He has compiled an exemplary record in public service and in business that underscores the strong linkage between economic and environmental progress, unquote. I would also like to ask unanimous consent to place into the record an editorial from the Los Angeles Times titled, Commerce Department nominee deserves the job. May I do that?
Without objection.
Thank you.
Sorry, Pete.
So, Mr. President, Mr. Bryson's unique background will serve him well as he works with President Obama and with the Senate and the House to create jobs. I applaud our President for choosing such a well-qualified, experienced individual to be Commerce Secretary, and I want to thank Chairman Rockefeller, Ranking Member Hutchison, for working together so we could get to this vote today. I yield the floor.
Senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
First, let me thank my good friend, the Senator from California, Senator Boxer, for speaking, because I asked her to do it. You know, a lot of people are surprised on how well we get along. The committee that she chairs is called the Environment and Public Works Committee. I'm the ranking member. When Republicans were in the majority, I was the chairman. And I'm looking forward to being chairman again. But that's another conversation for another day. But the reason I wanted to speak is because we do, and a lot of people are surprised to see this, we get along very well. Right now, we are doing everything we possibly can to get a highway reauthorization bill. And for those of us, she prides herself in being a very proud liberal, and I pride myself in being a very proud conservative. And yet we both know that one of our primary functions here is to do something about infrastructure. I have often been ranked as the most conservative member of this body, of the United States Senate, and I often have said, yeah, I may be conservative. I'm a big spender in two areas, national defense and infrastructure. I mean, that's what we're supposed to be doing here. Right now we have the most deplorable problem in the condition of our roads and highways and bridges. My state of Oklahoma goes back and forth being dead last or next to last behind Missouri as having the worst condition of our bridges. And we had a lady not too long ago in my state of Oklahoma, in Oklahoma City, who was driving. She's a mother of two small children. She was driving in one of the big interstate bridges, driving under it. A block of concrete fell off, and it killed her. She's the mother of two small children. We have people dying every day on the highways because of the condition of the highways. And for that, I applaud Senator Boxer for joining me to put together this coalition. And I don't want to say anything that would be improper at this time, but it's my expectation, not just hope, but expectation, that we're going to be able to come up with a highway reauthorization bill, and it's going to be one that is at least holding the current spending level. If we were to have to go back to the level of the proceeds of the Highway Trust Fund, that would be about 34% less than what we're spending today. And I defy any one of my fellow senators from all of the 50 states to tell me one state that isn't having just as serious a problem as my state of Oklahoma is having. And so I think that it's important that we recognize that there are some things the government's supposed to be doing and some things that brings us all together. And again, that's what it's going to happen. I can remember back the last reauthorization bill we had was 2005. At that time, I was the chairman of the committee. We all worked together. We came up with I thought it was a $284.6 billion 5-year bill. And yet, as robust as that was, that did very little more than just maintain what we have today. No new bridges, all these new things that we need to have. And I think a lot of the people that are my good friends, primarily over in the House, that we came under the banner of the Tea Parties and all that, they recognize, yes, you can be a conservative, but when they got home, they said, well, wait a minute, yeah, we wanted not to be spending these big things. We weren't talking about transportation. So we've got to single out transportation for my conservative friends to recognize there's the place where we need to be spending more money, not less money. So I look forward to that, and I hope that we'll have an announcement to make as one of the most liberal and one of the most conservative members joining and coming up with a highway reauthorization bill. There's not unanimity in what it will look like other than the spending level should maybe remain where it is today. And it should be something that is going to address these problems. There are going to be a lot of sacrifices along the way. I know that when we mark up a bill, there are going to be a lot of things in there that I don't like and that Senator Boxer doesn't like, and we're going to have to give up some of these things. And I've made it very clear that back in the days, in the early days, when I was actually serving in the other body, we always had surpluses in the Highway Trust Fund, and we're able to take care of these needs. Then, as typical as politicians are this way, they see a pot of money, they want in on it. So we had all these groups, and a lot of them were environmental groups that wanted to have their own agenda attached to it. Well, we're going to have to get serious and make this a highway bill. And by the way, this would also be probably certainly the biggest jobs bill that we've had during this administration, since we have not done, this administration has done a lousy job of providing jobs. But having said that, and I said that because I want to draw a contrast here. We're about to consider and vote on the President's nominee, John Bryson, to be Secretary of Commerce. Now, he's President Obama's choice. It's a clear indication that he has no intention of backing down on his job-killing war on affordable energy. But I have to say this. we're not talking about with John Bryson. This isn't Van Jones we're talking about. This is a guy who's a nice guy, and we have a lot of mutual friends. I've been contacted by people who are friends of mine, who are friends of his, and clearly he is a person that is really is well received in terms of being a good person. But he's dead wrong on the issues that will provide jobs for America. And at a time when unemployment is sky high, President Obama chooses the founder of, and I'll characterize it differently than my friend from California did, is one of the most radical left-wing extreme environmentalist groups, the Natural Resources Defense Council. It is a left-wing organization, which in the name of global warming seeks to cut off access to our natural resources and increase drastically the price of electricity and gasoline across America. And we know this is true because we know that if they would merely develop the resources that we have today in the United States of America, we wouldn't have to be dependent upon the Middle East for one barrel of oil. We wouldn't have to worry about our supply of gas and coal because we have, as I'll explain in just a minute and document, the largest recoverable resources in coal, gas, and oil of any country in the world. Now, Mr. Bryson once called the Waxman-Markey cap-and-trade bill moderate. Now, this particular cap-and-trade bill was probably the most liberal of all the cap-and-trade bills that were there. And by the way, I have to say this one thing. I understand I'm the last speaker tonight, and what do all of the speakers who are in favor of this have in common? They are all supporting cap-and-trade with the exception of Senator Hutchinson, and she's retiring. But stop and think about it. Boxer, Feinstein, Rockefeller, Kerry, McCain, they're all strong supporters of cap-and-trade. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight because I know where John Bryson is on cap-and-trade. He told some students at the University of California, Berkeley, last year, that, and I'm going to quote now so I don't get it wrong, cap-and-trade, quote, cap-and-trade has the advantage politically at sort of hiding the fact that you have a major tax. Now, to me, the fact that you're supporting something that's a major tax increase on the American people is bad enough. But when you say one of the good things about cap-and-trade is you can hide the fact that it's a major tax increase. And this, we know now what this would cost. Cap-and-trade is cap-and-trade. It doesn't make any difference if it was back during the Kyoto days. It doesn't make any difference if it was any of the bills that were passed. Still, the analysis is that the cost of a cap-and-trade bill would be between $300 and $400 billion a year. And this is legislation that would cost the taxpayers $300 to $400 billion a year. It'd destroy hundreds of thousands of jobs. It'd hurt families and workers by raising the price of gasoline and electricity. And yet he believes, this nominee for Secretary of Commerce believes that that was a moderate bill, the Waxman-Markey bill. The Secretary of Commerce should have a record of promoting, not stifling economic growth. And John Bryson's career shows that he has a clear record of the latter. And it makes no sense to have a Secretary of Commerce who's against commerce. You know, I'm not the only one who thinks so. Let me just share, and I'm going to quote these because an editorial, for example, in the Wall Street Journal. Quote, I'm quoting now, President Obama nominated John Bryson to head the Commerce Department on Tuesday, praising the Californian as a business leader who understands what it takes to innovate, to create jobs, and to persevere through tough times. Going on to quoting the Wall Street Journal, that's one way of describing someone with a talent of scoring government subsidies. And we keep hearing, and I think they hit the nail on the head there. And they answer the question. People say, well, this man has been very successful. For 18 years, he ran the, let me see what it was called here, one of the major utilities, and it was out in California. And it's one of the interesting things about it is this utility out there is not one that was using coal. This is using renewables. And obviously, all they do, as the Wall Street Journal pointed out, if they have the very heavy expenses and they raise the price of energy, it doesn't hurt the utilities. They pass it on. Pass it on to the consumers who ultimately have to pay for it. Quoting further, the Washington Examiner, Quote, but there is another side of Bryson, one that fits squarely in the tradition of radical Obama appointees like Green Jobs czar Van Jones, a self-proclaimed Marxist, Medicare head Don Berwick, who swoons over Britain's socialized National Health Service, the National Labor Relations Board member Craig Becker, the former labor lawyer who never met a union power grab he didn't back. That's quoting from the Washington Examiner. Here's Investors Business Daily. And I'm still quoting. The nominee for Commerce Secretary founded an anti-energy group and believes in redistribution of wealth to help poorer nations. At this rate, we'll be one of them. If personnel is policy, there can be no better choice to help implement President Obama's anti-growth energy policy and redistribution of wealth plans than his choice to be the next Secretary of Commerce, John Bryson. Again, that's the Investors Business Daily. The ACU came out and they said putting John Bryson in charge of the Commerce Department is the dictionary definition of putting the fox in charge of the hen house. Well, that's exactly what it is, and that's what, and you know, that's one reason that I would prefer we not have this vote tonight. I would like to have all of us go back for this one-week recess and let the people know that this is about to be voted on, and I think that's one reason that they are going to be doing it tonight. By the way, I'm not critical of the leadership, certainly not the Democrat or Republican leadership. In fact, I went to them and I said, so long as you will give me a 60-vote threshold, I would waive going through all the loops of filibustering and having cloture votes and all that. So I appreciate that, but my intent was to wait, and I still would ask them formally if they would change this UC under which we're operating and allow this vote to take place when we come back from this one-week recess. The choice of Bryson is also part of President Obama's green energy jobs push. In fact, the President said that he specifically nominated, listen to this, Mr. President, he specifically nominated Bryson because he is a, quote, a fierce proponent of alternative energy. But with more than 99% unemployment and the complete collapse of the solar company Solyndra, the President's green agenda is clearly not creating jobs. In the end, Solyndra is more than just a bankrupt company. It's a metaphor for the failure of Obama's war on affordable energy and American fossil fuel jobs. I've already called for hearings in the Senate on Solyndra, and I hope that won't be long before they occur. President Obama has received the message loud and clear that his global warming green agenda no longer sells, but that doesn't mean that he has given up trying to implement it. Bryson is just one figure in Obama's green team. He follows in the footsteps of Carol Browner, Anthony Van Jones, who also supported increasing taxes on America's energy, as well as Energy Secretary Stephen Chu. You remember Stephen Chu, the President's Energy Secretary, who said, quote, somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe. That's around $8 a gallon. So it's the intention of this administration to raise gas prices, to either reduce, force them into some other type of energy, or to stop people from having the freedom of driving, as we always have in this country. But that was the Energy Secretary Stephen Chu, who said that we've got to bring our price of gasoline at the pumps up to that in of Europe. Then we had also Alan Krueger. Alan Krueger has been nominated by President Obama to be the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors as yet another example. And during his time at the Department of Treasury under President Obama, Mr. Krueger made it clear his opposition to the development of traditional domestic energy. He even went so far as to say, and I'm quoting now, the administration believes that it is no longer sufficient to address our nation's energy needs by finding more fossil fuels. He further stated, and I'm still quoting Alan Krueger, this when he was in the Treasury Department, and he's his nominee now for the chairman of the Board of Council Advisors, Advisory Council. The administration's goal is to have resources invested in ways which yield the highest social return. Now that is the nominee, the current nominee for the to be chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for the president. Well, he doesn't need that advice. He's already doing it. Yet Congressional Research Service reports America has the largest recoverable resources of oil, gas, and coal in the world. The Obama administration, their failure to appreciate this fact is one of the many reasons why they are not making progress in creating jobs and improving our economy. This is a key here. When this discovery was made, this was a Congressional Research Service, nobody has denied this, that when they came out, that was less than a year ago, and they said that America has the largest recoverable resource of oil, gas, and coal in the world. That means we could be totally self-sufficient. All we have to do is develop our own resources. And there is not one, I defy anyone on this floor to tell me there's one other country that doesn't develop its own resources. We're the only one. And so we have 83% of our non-shore public lands off limits. We have these huge reserves out there, but we can't go after them. Then there's Rebecca Water, who's President Obama has chosen to be the Assistant Secretary for the Fish and Wildlife Departments. That would be for the Department of Interior. As CEO of American Rivers, which works actively to shut down energy production in the United States, she, Rebecca Water, is a strong advocate for the federal regulation of hydraulic fracturing, a practice that has been efficient. By the way, hydraulic fracturing, this is kind of interesting because it wasn't long ago that President Obama was lauding the virtues of natural gas, and then at the very end of his speech, he talked about we're going to have to do something about hydraulic fracturing. Look, Mr. President, hydraulic fracturing started in my state of Oklahoma in 1948. We've gone, you know, there have been I can't really quantify the hundreds of thousands of wells that have been hydraulically fractured, but it's in the hundreds and thousands, maybe 1.5 million. I've heard that figure. And yet, with the exception of one well back in 1986 where somebody actually went into an aquifer, there hasn't been one documented case in over 1 million hydraulic fractured wells where it has contaminated groundwater. And yet, they're using that, knowing full well that if you kill hydraulic fracturing, you kill all the oil and gas in tight formations, because you can't get it without that. The selection of Mrs. Water is a clear departure from her predecessor, Tom Strickland, who in testimony before EPW committee, that's our committee, said that we should actively and aggressively develop our energy resources. Unfortunately, Ms. Waters' support for regulation advancement suggested that she would do the opposite, which exposes the reality of President Obama's agenda of increasing energy prices and destroying jobs. These nominations, and of course we're talking tonight about another nomination, a person who's a good guy and all that, but John Bryson, to be in a position to follow all the rest of these who are doing everything they can to kill fossil fuels. And when you kill fossil fuels, we know, and the President admitted, that it would cause our price of electricity in America to skyrocket. These nominations are not surprising when you remember that President Obama said himself that he wants electricity rates to skyrocket. As he told the San Francisco Chronicle, he said, quote, "If anybody wants to build a coal-fired plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them." And that's just what the Obama EPA regulations tend to do. The EPA is moving forward with an unprecedented number of rules for coal-fired plants and industrial boilers that have now become known as the infamous train wreck for the incredible harm that they will do to our economy. They're set to destroy hundreds of thousands of jobs and significantly raise energy prices for families, businesses, and farmers, basically anyone who drives a car or flips a switch. The President himself has now publicly acknowledged this. And when he stopped the agency from tightening the national ambient air quality standards for ozone, his statement couldn't have been clearer. The EPA rules create regulatory burdens and uncertainty that stifle job creation. And just last week, the EPA also pulled back on its plan to tighten regulation on farm dust, undoubtedly due to bipartisan concern that it would cause great harm to our farmers. With all these regulations, I've given the speech on the floor, and I'm not going to repeat it tonight, about what it costs, all of the regulations that this President is trying to put forth. in terms of his MAC regulation. That means maximum achievable control technology. He has the refinery MAC. He has the boiler MAC. He has the farm desk MAC. These are things that he is trying to do where the technology is not even there. You know, I found out something just the other day that in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and I can't recall the name of the company now, but they make platforms for hydraulic fracturing. And I don't know whether the senator from California has ever seen one of these platforms. I've seen a lot of them. They make a lot of them in Oklahoma. And this young man who is the president of this company showed me these platforms. These platforms are about, you put maybe 4 of them in this chamber. That's how big they are. And on these platforms, this is to do hydraulic fracturing. They have a great big diesel engine. And this diesel engine is necessary to do hydraulic fracturing of oil wells. Well, they came out with a regulation the other day I didn't even know about. And they said that after a certain date, I can't tell you exactly where it was, in the next couple of months, that you would not be able to use the diesel engines on your platform that does hydraulic fracturing, and thus it is a, quote, Tier 4 engine, diesel engine. Well, here's the problem. They don't make them. They're on the drawing board, they're making them, but they're not on the market yet. And so they're shutting down the people who are building the platforms to do hydraulic fracturing through regulations. And every day we run into new regulations. I can remember on the farm desk regulation, I had a news conference in my state of Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, we went back to, I had people coming out from Washington, D.C. who had never been west of the Mississippi, and we went down southwest of the town of Altus, Oklahoma, and I said in my news conference, and the cameras were rolling, and I said, now this president is trying to do something to regulate farm dust. Now let me explain something to you. If you all will look down here, that brown stuff down there, that's called dirt. Now if you look at that round green thing down there, that's cotton. And now put your finger in the air, that's called wind. Now, are there any questions? What I'm saying is, and they all realize that there is no technology to regulate farm dust, and yet they're trying to do it in every farm. Right now, the major farm organizations like American Farm Bureau, they are ones who are saying that's their #1 concern right now, is what they're trying to do to shut down farms in America. Yet the EPA continues to push the regulations that harm the economy. The cross-air state pollution rule, the so-called Utility MAC, they're prime examples of rules that are poised to destroy jobs. Let's not forget the economic ramifications of global warming. I want to talk about that one, but before we leave the Utility MAC, we have right now utilities that are notifying coal producers saying that if this goes through, we're not going to be able to honor our contracts to buy coal from you. That's how serious it is. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of employees. Now, let's get to the big one now. The economic ramifications of global warming regulations imposed by the Obama EPA in the Clean Air Act, which costs American consumers between $300 and $400 billion a year. The reason I want to mention this is because there have been attempts since the Kyoto Treaty, and of course we did not ratify the Kyoto Treaty, and we didn't do it for a very good reason, and that is it would cause extreme economic harm on the United States of America. It would only affect the developing nations and not the developed nations. It would only affect the developed nations like the United States and some of the European nations, but not the developing nations. So it wouldn't have the effect of reducing CO2 if you wanted to reduce CO2. Now, there have been bills all the way, ever since the 1990s, there have been about 7 or 8 different bills to try to do, here in the United States, to do away with, to impose some kind of cap and trade. But they weren't able to do it because the people in this body won't vote for it. In this body, right now, you couldn't get 25, maybe at the most, 30 votes, and it takes 60 votes to pass something. You couldn't get more than 30 votes to vote for a cap-and-trade bill. So the president realized this. He realized that with all the people, with jobs that would be lost and the cost of this thing, the fact that it would be impose a tax of around $300 to $400 billion a year on the American people. I remember back in 1993, and that was during the Clinton-Gore years. And I remember when they came out with their big tax increase. I'll never forget it because I was serving at that time over in the other body. And they came out and they were raising marginal rates, raising cap and gain taxes. They were raising all the taxes, retirement, and the cost of that was some $30 billion a year. And I remember coming down to the floor of the House of Representatives and saying, we can't afford $30 billion a year. Well, this tax would be 10 times that, between $300 and $400 billion a year. And that's what they're trying to do. Now, when the President realized that he was not able to pass this legislatively, he decided through regulations he was going to pass his own cap and trade. And I've got to say this, there are people out there who still believe, not very many, but they still believe that somehow we're having catastrophic global warming and it's due to anthropogenic gases or CO2 emissions. And so I remember, and I'm very fond of Lisa Jackson, who's the EPA administrator appointed by President Obama, because I asked her the question. I said, you know, if we were to pass any of these cap and trade bills, would this reduce worldwide CO2 emissions? She said no, because it would only affect the United States of America. This isn't where the problem is. If it's a problem, that problem is in Mexico, in China, in India, in places that don't have any kind of restrictions. And so so he's trying to do that, to impose that tax. By the way, I know people get worn out when they hear talking about billions or $1 trillion, and I'm not as smart as most of these guys around here, so I do it a little bit differently. I keep track of the number of families in my state of Oklahoma who file an income tax return, and then I do my math. Well, if we were to pass cap and trade, or if he's able to do it through regulations, which are sponsored, by the way, by John Bryson, the nominee we're talking about tonight, if he were to do it, it would increase the taxes by between $300 and $400 billion a year. Now, do your math with the number of people who file a tax return in my state of Oklahoma, and it would be approximately $3,000 a family. Now, what do you get for it? You get nothing by their own admission, because it would not reduce the worldwide emissions. Well, what this president fails to realize is that affordable, reliable energy is the lifeblood of a healthy economy and the foundation of our global competitiveness. Instead, he continues to favor the radical environmental agenda ahead of turning around our economy and putting Americans back to work. On the other hand, in my state of Oklahoma, oil and gas development has led to a tremendous economic boost in the creation of good-paying jobs. Right now, in my state of Oklahoma, you know, you talk about a 9.2% unemployment rate that they have nationwide. My state of Oklahoma is 5.5%. I'm sorry, it's about 5.5% or 5.2%. Well, that's about half of the national average, and it's due, by and large, to the fact that we have this growth in people who are in the energy business. So we can continue going down the path of President Obama's job-killing agenda, or we can start developing our nation's vast natural resources, which are the key to the nation's recovery. That's jobs. That's cheap gas at the pumps. We certainly have plenty of them. The CRS report I mentioned shows that America's combined recoverable natural gas, oil, and coal endowment is the largest on earth. In fact, our recoverable resources are far greater than those of Saudi Arabia, China, and Canada combined. We have 163 billion barrels of recoverable oil in the United States of America. And that's enough to maintain our current levels of production as the world's third largest producer and replace our imports from the Persian Gulf for more than 50 years. In other words, on oil alone, it would be, if we just develop what we have here, it'd take care of our needs that we know is down there for 50 years. And we could say the same thing for natural gas. At the current consumption, America's future supply of natural gas is 2,000 trillion cubic feet, and at today's rate of use, that's enough to run the United States of America for 90 years. 90 years, just imagine that. And the only problem is our politicians won't let us develop our own resources. And finally, the report that I referred to, which is a fairly recent report, also reveals that America is #1 in the coal reserves with more than 28% of the world's coal. And now that is a real solution to the energy security and the key to economic prosperity. Now, John Bryson, if he were to become, and the vote would take place, energy development and economic growth in Oklahoma and across the nation could be in jeopardy. And that's why I'm doing everything I can to tell the truth to the American people. It's been said to me by Democrats and Republicans alike that their phone has been ringing off the hook by people who serve on boards with John Bryson. And I agreed. And I said at the very beginning that he is a good person. But he is of the philosophy, and he's an outspoken proponent of cap and trade. And that's what we can't afford. And I wonder, really, I know there's a lot of pressure put on the members of this body. I wonder where all the conservatives are tonight. I really appreciate John Barrasso, Senator Barrasso, coming here and talking, as I am talking, and telling the truth about the problem that we have. And sometimes, someplace, we got to draw the line. I named all of these appointments that the President has made, the nominations he's made, but we have to draw the line. And I felt that this is a good place to do it, and I recognize that there's going to be a lot of pressure on conservatives to kind of sit this one out, but I want them to keep in mind that this is the #1 concern of most of the conservative groups right now. I read the editorials that were out there. Everybody knows our eyes are open. This is not a vote where you go later on and say, oh, I wish I'd known that. I would have voted no, because this is your chance to do it. Have I had calls from people on boards? Yeah, I have. And they've all said, yeah, we really want, he's a good friend of ours, and I want to weigh in. One of them was kind of interesting. He called up and he went through this whole thing. And then after he told me how great John Bryson was, he said, now, have you got that down? I called. You've written that down. Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, just ignore everything I said. So this can happen. We know that the phone calls come in. And these are important people. They're leaders out there. And I love them all. And I love John Bryson. But we're going to have to draw the line. If you want to have an advocate for the largest tax increase in the history of America, that's the tax increase that is called cap and trade, then this is the nominee for the Secretary of Commerce that is committed to cap and trade in America. So I just guess, Mr. President, I wish that we were not going to take this vote until the end of the recess, because I'd love to have people go home and try to answer questions from people who are out there in the real world as to why is it that someone isn't standing up for us to develop our own natural resources, our own energy, and reduce the price of electricity, reduce the price of gas, and think of us for a change. That's what's going to happen. I think right now that by rushing this vote before people have time to realize it, that very likely it's going to pass. But I don't want anyone to say that they weren't informed, because I'm informing them right now. And I thank Senator Barrasso for joining me in that information. With that, I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas is recognized.
Mr. President, I think everyone who
The
has
Senate
asked,
is currently in a quorum call.
I suggest Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to suspend the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, everyone who has asked for speaking time on my side has spoken, and I yield back the rest of our time.
Mr. President,
The senator from West Virginia is recognized.
I yield back all time on our side, and I ask for the vote and call for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Begich. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo, Mr. Dement, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Inouye, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Carey. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reid of Rhode Island. Mr. Reid of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Ayotte, Baucus, Begich, Bennett, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Boxer, Casey, Chambliss, Cochran, Collins, Conrad, Coons, Corker, Durbin, Franken, Hagan, Harkin, Hutchison, Inouye, Isaacson, Kirk, Menendez, Mikulski, Murray, Nelson of Nebraska, Reed of Rhode Island, Reed of Nevada, Rockefeller, Sanders, Schumer, Shaheen, Tester, Thune, Toomey, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Webb, Whitehouse. Senators voting in the negative: Coburn, Cornyn, DeMint, Inhofe, Kyle, Roberts, Rubio, Vitter, Wicker. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, no. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Akaka. Mr. Akaka, aye. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley, aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Ms. Cantwell. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Leahy, aye. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, no. Mrs. McCaskill. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Hatch, no. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coates, aye. Mr. McCain. Mr. McCain, aye. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Lugar, aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Enzi. Mr. Enzi, no. Mr. Johans, Mr. Johans, aye. Mr. Risch, no. Ms. Murkowski, Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Crapo, Mr. Crapo, no. Mr. Johnson, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, aye. Mr. Kerry, Mr. Kerry, aye. Mr. Pryor, Mr. Pryor, aye. Mr. Bozeman, Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Manchin, Mr. Manchin, aye. Mr. Cardin, Mr. Cardin, aye. Mr. Burr, no. Mr. Shelby, no. Mr. Heller, no. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Lieberman, aye. Mr. Durbin, aye. Ms. Snow, aye. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Nelson of Florida, aye. Mr. Lautenberg, aye. Mr. Brown of Ohio, aye. Mr. Blunt, no. Mr. Grassley, no. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Hoven, no. Mr. Levin, aye. Mr. Sessions, Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Stabenow, aye.